Damian Peter McKenzie was born on May 28, 1964 in Timboon, Australia, to Peter Murdoch McKenzie, a bus driver and motor mechanic, and his wife, Marcia. The couple shared 5 children between them, including 10-year-old Damian. The McKenzie family lived in the Cobden countryside, a town located in the southwest of Victoria, Australia. The Mackenzies were loving, caring, and very hard-working, a typical Australian family. According to those who knew him best, Damian was a kind-natured boy who was well-behaved, friendly, and extremely responsible for his age. Like most boys around about his age, Damian had a strong sense of adventure and adored the outdoors. He also enjoyed participating in athletics and was even a school's champion in the sport. Damian was part of the YAL, the Young Australian League, an enterprise created to encourage positive growth in youngsters, and the group were given the opportunity in September of 1974 to go on a camping trip to the Marysville area, which was to occur over a 5-day period from the 2nd to the 6th of September. Over 40 young people were confirmed to be partaking in the excursion, including Damian McKenzie. The camp was primarily based at Acheron River in Taggarty. However, during the trip, the children would travel to various places by bus where they would carry out all sorts of outdoor activities, including hiking. On Wednesday, the 4th of September 1974, 10-year-old Damian, alongside his fellow campmates and adult supervisors, decided to hike up to Stevenson Falls, located near to the Stevenson River in Victoria. The campers had actually travelled up to the falls on the night of the 2nd of September in the hopes that the trip would see the waterfall under floodlights. However, that night the lights were faulty, so the visit had to be rescheduled. Damian spent much of his time with his 2 closest friends, who also came from his hometown of Cobden, and at this point the trio were all thoroughly enjoying their camping excursion. It is stated that in one source there may have been a side trip on the same day as the visit to Stevenson Falls, dividing the group by sexes. It's suggested that the boys went to the falls whilst the girls were participating in another activity, though other sources report that some girls were present on the hiking trip to the falls. At approximately 11:30 a.m, whilst hiking along the trail leading to the top of Stevenson Falls on the right side of the Stevenson River, Damian abruptly ran ahead of the group in excitement, the 10-year-old disappearing into thick brush as he headed towards the peak of the falls. There are a number of conflicting reports as to whether Damian took off alone, with members of the troop, or even with 2 older boys who weren't a part of the trip. Regardless, after Damian disappeared into the brush, he was never seen again. After a short time, Damian's 2 friends noticed that he was missing, and it was then that they informed the camp leaders, who conducted an initial search of the area, but without success. It was at this point that authorities were contacted, and an official search and rescue operation was launched. Over 300 people, including Damian's parents, Victoria and Alexandra police officers, search and rescue teams and volunteers searched the Stevenson Falls and surrounding areas over the following days and nights, but the rough and rugged terrain and heavy rainfall, even on one occasion snowfall, hindered the search significantly. A helicopter was brought in to aid in the search, but poor visibility and heavy clouds made it almost impossible to see anything on the ground. Due to the challenging weather conditions and the lack of experience of many of the volunteers, some areas were scoured more than once, whereas others weren't searched at all. By the second day of searching, the weather was extremely cold and wet, and there was an extremely high possibility that if Damian was still out in the mountains, he would have suffered from hypothermia. Searchers did find something rather interesting, however: footprints along the right side of the river where Damian was last seen. However, what struck investigators as odd was that the footprints simply ceased. There was no sign of any struggle, and no other footprints were present nearby. It was almost as if Damian had vanished on the spot. Strange markings resembling letters were also found in some dirt, and a balloon was found in the search area too. However, police dismissed them as being unrelated to Damian's disappearance. Police brought out sniffer dogs in order to trace Damian's scent, but unfortunately they found nothing. Nobody suspicious was seen in the area at the time either, which makes this case all the more baffling. 3 days into the search, Damian's father, Peter, collapsed. He was extremely distressed by the disappearance of his son, and the mental and physical strain of looking for him was taking an enormous toll on him and the rest of his family. All of the McKenzies were extremely fearful and anxiety-ridden. All they wanted was for Damian to be found safe and well. After 6 harrowing days of searching through 12 square miles of scrub and overgrowth, the search was called off after authorities failed to find any clues in regards to the whereabouts of the 10-year-old schoolboy, tragically concluding that there was very little chance by this point that Damian was still alive. The search for Damian was one of the largest scale searches in Victoria's history, but despite authorities' best efforts to locate him, Damian was never found. Police believe that Damian succumbed to the elements after he disappeared, simply getting lost in the mountains after separating from the other campers. But if this was the case, his body has never been recovered. It should be noted that if Damian did die in the brush, his remains would have decomposed at a rapid rate and would have likely have been victim to animal scavenging, potentially leaving no trace of him at all. There are a number of other theories which are possible in regards to what happened to the 10-year-old boy, such as falling into the river, being swept downstream, and ultimately drowning. Again, it is recorded that the river was running unusually high and very fast on the day Damian vanished, due to the rainy weather, but also snow melting higher up in the mountains. Being swept away is a possibility, but divers and search teams who scoured the river, the falls, and the weirs extensively found no trace of Damian. Abduction is also considered a possibility in this case, despite it sounding unlikely. There was a very dangerous child predator in Victoria at the time who abducted and murdered a young boy just 8 days after Damian disappeared. The perpetrator was known to travel significant distances to cover his tracks, but unfortunately there is no significant evidence to suggest that he was involved in this particular disappearance. The perpetrator was known to prey on young boys who were in rural areas, but not necessarily in the Australian bush. The man in question passed away in 1975 whilst in prison, so it's unlikely we will ever know whether he was involved in Damian's vanishing. Another potential suspect in regards to abduction was investigated by police, a man who was imprisoned for abducting and murdering 2 young boys in Tasmania. This individual's whereabouts between 1971 and 1975 is unknown. It is entirely possible that Damian could have been victim of a sex offender. As the years have gone by, many incidents of child sex offences have come to light, especially from the 1970s. Many of these individuals were trusted members of their communities, just like the camp leaders were on the specific excursion to Stevenson Falls, but these individuals used that trust to exploit children in unimaginable ways. Another theory which is discussed in regards to this case is that Damian could have been victim to animal predators in the bush. The area itself was known to be home to a number of wild dogs and some wild cats. Considering he was only a 10-year-old boy, it would have been difficult for him to defend himself if these predators attacked him. Another theory suggests that Damian could have fallen down an abandoned mine shaft. Maryville and its surrounding areas were subject to the famous gold rush, and there are still hundreds of mines which remain in the area to this day, either filled or simply abandoned. Regardless of the numerous theories, what happened to Damian remains a mystery to this day. Unfortunately, this incident wasn't the first time Stevenson Falls had been subject to tragedy. In January of 1968, 6 years prior to Damian's disappearance, a group of 7 teenagers went hiking towards the top of the falls. Bruce Fidge, Jay Hutty, Peter Simmons, Dorothy McNally, Janine Clark, Danella Khan, and Margaret Weichalt. The group, who had gotten to know each other through meeting at the guest house they were staying in, had split into 2 smaller groups, with 4 of the friends, Jay, Peter, Dorothy and Janine, ahead of the 3 others, Bruce, Margaret and Donella, who were lagging behind. The 7 then stopped during the hike for a break. However, it was at this point that tragedy struck. A dead tree fell on top of the 4 friends at the front of the group. And as a result, Peter, Jay, Dorothy, and Janine all perished. The 3 others escaped with minor injuries, but the trauma of what they witnessed that day never left them. A retired Victorian police detective, Senior Sergeant Valentine Smith, started reinvestigating the case when he went for lunch with one of Damian's brothers, Stephen, who worked as a detective sergeant in the police. The 2 eventually started discussing Damian's case, and with the blessing of the McKenzie family, were able to reopen the investigation, which is now being re-examined by professional volunteers. Investigators on Valentine's team are trying to trace a woman named Shirley O'Brien, who was one of the adult supervisors during the hiking trip, but so far they have only reached dead ends. The investigative team want to put the pieces of the puzzle together in regards to exactly the timeline of events of that day. And they believe Shirley may be able to help them in their investigation. Valentine is also appealing for any information from the children who attended the camp that week in September 1974. Even the smallest piece of information could be crucial to solving this cold case. Something which Valentine is wanting to do is increase outdoor education for youngsters in Australia, teaching children survival skills for if they ever get lost in the bush. Learning such skills could be life-saving. If Damian had known more about surviving in the wilderness, his life too could have been saved. A memorial bench for Damian was placed by Stevenson Falls by his family as a constant reminder that he hasn't been forgotten. There is also a memorial at the falls for the 4 teenagers who perished in 1968. Even after almost 50 years, Damian's family still haven't given up hope that someday they will find answers, and their agonising suffering of not knowing what happened to the 10-year-old can finally be put to rest.